It was a bright, crisp morning when Flight 742 was preparing to leave London for New York. The passengers were excited. Businessmen clutching laptops, families with kids chattering about their vacation, and elderly couples enjoying the calm before the journey. At the heart of it all was Captain Michael Harris, a veteran pilot with over 20 years of flying experience. Beside him was his co-pilot, a young yet confident man named Lucas who had just completed his first solo flight months ago. But the day would take a shocking turn. Among the passengers was 12-year-old Emma Carter, an unusually sharp and observant girl with a love for aviation. She had spent hours watching flight tutorials online and learning about cockpits. Today she was accompanying her parents for a long-awaited holiday, completely unaware that her knowledge would soon become a lifeline for hundreds. As the plane taxied onto the runway and lifted into the clouds, passengers settled in, some peering out the windows at the shrinking city below, others drifting into light sleep. Everything seemed normal until mid-flight, roughly 4 hours into the journey, when a sudden alarming sound echoed from the cockpit. Passengers heard muffled shouts, the clatter of equipment, and then silence. Panic began to ripple through the cabin. The flight attendants rushed to the cockpit, only to find Captain Harris slumped over his controls unconscious, with Lucas frozen in shock beside him. The plane was now hurtling through the air at 35,000 feet, with no one actively controlling it. Amid the chaos, Emma's eyes widened as she took in the scene. She had read about emergencies like this in aviation manuals. What to do if both pilots were incapacitated? Her heart pounded, but she knew she had to act. Calmly, she whispered to herself, "I can do this. I have to." The flight attendants, sensing her determination, stepped back. They had tried to reach Lucas, but he couldn't move past his panic. Emma slipped into the cockpit, her small hands steady as she grasped the controls. She quickly remembered the basics she had learned: maintain altitude, check instruments, and keep the plane level. Outside, clouds stretched endlessly, the sun creating shimmering patches of gold on their edges. Inside, the cockpit was tense, filled with the hum of engines and the muffled cries of passengers unsure of what was happening. Emma's mind raced. She focused, recalling every tutorial she had watched, every video she had studied, every diagram of a cockpit she had memorized. With trembling fingers but a steady mind, she managed to stabilize the plane temporarily. The co-pilot, Lucas, watching her courage, finally snapped out of his shock. He muttered, You know what you're doing." Emma nodded, refusing to meet his eyes. Every second counted. Lives were depending on her. Below, the Atlantic stretched endlessly, a daunting expanse with no room for error. Above, the clouds were thickening, the weather unpredictable. Emma's hands gripped the yoke, eyes darting between instruments, her small frame barely visible against the massive controls. As the flight attendants returned to calm the passengers, a ripple of whispers began. "Who is that girl? How is she flying the plane?" Emma ignored them. Focus was her only ally now. She had to keep the aircraft steady, prepare for descent, and somehow, guide it to safety. And that was when RET real test began. The cabin buzzed with fear and confusion. Passengers clutched each other, eyes wide, as whispers spread like wildfire. "Is someone flying the plane? A child?" The crew tried to calm them, but the truth was too shocking to mask. A 12-year-old girl was in command of Flight 742. In the cockpit, Emma's small hands gripped the controls tightly. Her fingers were trembling, but her mind was laser-focused. Every instrument, every dial, every blinking light was a lifeline. She remembered the tutorials she had painstakingly studied: airspeed, altitude, heading, autopilot functions. Slowly, she engaged the autopilot to maintain the plane's altitude, giving herself a precious few minutes to plan. Lucas, still pale and shaken, hovered nearby. He couldn't believe what he was witnessing. You actually know how to do this?" he stammered. Emma gave a firm nod, her eyes never leaving the instruments. "I have to," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "There's no one else." Outside, turbulence began to shake the plane. Storm clouds loomed ahead and gusts of wind tossed the aircraft like a toy. Emma's heart raced, but she forced herself to stay calm. She adjusted the throttle, monitoring the instruments, keeping the wings level. Each jolt tested her small frame, but she refused to falter. In the cabin, fear was mounting. Parents whispered reassurances to their children, some silently praying, others silently panicking. Flight attendants moved quickly, securing the aisles, reminding passengers to fasten their seatbelts. The murmurs were punctuated by sharp gasps as the plane jolted violently, lightning briefly illuminating the interior. Emma's mind raced through emergency procedures. She remembered reading that in such a crisis, communication with air traffic control was crucial. With a deep breath, she picked up the radio microphone. The descent into danger. Emma's voice quivered only slightly as she spoke into the radio. Mayday, Flight 742, Captain incapacitated. I am a passenger. Taking control. Air traffic controllers were stunned. Repeat your message, please, one of them asked. Emma repeated calmly, though her heart pounded. The controller's voice was firm but supportive. Stay calm, young lady. We will guide you. Do exactly as we say. Guided by the voice on the other end, Emma began the challenging task of descending the aircraft. The autopilot was helping, but she had to manually adjust speed, altitude, and course. Each instruction from the controller required instant comprehension and action. She checked the instruments repeatedly, ensuring the plane stayed on course, avoiding the storm clouds ahead. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the terrified faces of passengers through the windows. The plane rattled violently and a wave of panic surged through the cabin. Flight attendants clung to rails, trying to calm screaming children. Some passengers whispered prayers, others silently wept. Yet amid the chaos, Emma remained a beacon of focus. Lucas, slowly regaining composure, leaned closer. I can assist with communications and adjustments, he said, his voice shaking. Emma nodded, handing over some of the radio duties. Together, the unlikely duo navigated the plane through turbulence and shifting winds. As they neared the approach to New York, Emma had to tackle one of the most difficult maneuvers of all, preparing for landing. The plane needed to slow gradually, align with the runway, and descend at the perfect angle, all while ensuring 600 passengers remained safe. Every mistake could be catastrophic. Her hands gripped the yoke tightly. Sweat dripped down her forehead. She adjusted flaps, monitored airspeed, and mentally calculated the approach. The controller's calm voice guided her. Steady, steady. Maintain glide path. You're doing great. Emma drew strength from the encouragement, knowing lives depended on her. Outside, the sprawling city lights of New York emerged, glimmering through the storm. Emma could see the runway stretching out in the distance, a narrow strip of hope amid chaos. The plane shuddered, rocked by gusts, yet she stayed focused, adjusting every small control with precision and care. Passengers clutched each other tighter as the aircraft descended, some peeking at the cockpit with awe. Who was this brave girl holding life in her hands? The cabin was tense, every heart beating in unison with the plane's descent. Emma's mind calculated every second. She adjusted throttle, flaps, and angle. The runway was near, but turbulence was fierce. She took a deep breath, tightened her grip, and prepared for the most critical moment. The landing. The runway lights shone like beacons, guiding Flight 742 through the stormy night. Emma's small hands moved swiftly, adjusting each control with unwavering determination. The plane wobbled as gusts of wind threatened to push it off course, but she held it steady. Lucas coached from the side. You're almost there. Line it up, to keep steady. Emma's focus never wavered. Each second felt like an eternity as the plane descended lower and lower, the runway stretching out like a lifeline. With one final adjustment, the wheels touched the tarmac. The plane skidded slightly but remained on course. Emma gently applied the brakes, the engines humming as the aircraft slowed. Cheers erupted in the cabin, though Emma hardly noticed. She was still ensuring everyone's safety. The plane finally came to a complete stop. Flight attendants rushed to hug the passengers, tears streaming down their faces, and then, slowly, the realization hit. Emma Carter, a 12-year-old girl, had successfully landed a plane carrying 600 people. Emergency crews rushed to the scene, but no lives were lost. Passengers filed out, some barely believing the events they had just witnessed. News cameras captured Emma being lifted from the cockpit, her small frame trembling yet smiling faintly. She had done the impossible. The story of Flight 742 spread worldwide within hours. Headlines proclaimed the courage of the 12-year-old girl who saved hundreds. Interviews, awards, and recognition poured in, but Emma remained humble. I just did what I had to do, she said quietly, a hint of pride in her eyes. Captain Harris, recovering in the hospital, later met Emma. "You were incredible," he said, shaking her hand. "You've shown the world what courage looks like." Emma smiled, knowing she had turned fear into heroism, forever etching her name in history. Flight 742 became a symbol of hope, courage, and the human spirit. And for every person who heard her story, one truth was clear. Sometimes heroes come in the smallest, most unexpected forms.